Well, hello, friends, and welcome to Season 3 of the My Pilgrimage podcast. A few developments on our side of things. We're going to be trying to do these bi-weekly. So we're going to be scheduling these podcasts bi-weekly for Season 3, trying to make sure that we're pretty consistent in trying to get these out. It's been kind of a hectic season, this craziness, and today is Inauguration Day, and we have a new president. So guess what we're talking about? Politics. We've been talking about doing this episode for a long time, and Seth and I decided to hold off because we wanted to, it feels a little bit like a clean slate. And so here we are. So today, Seth and I just had a really great conversation after the inauguration about politics and about spirit and about how we give to Caesar what is Caesar's and how we give to God what is God's and how that interacts in our spiritual lives. So without further ado, here's the conversation, and I'll see you on the other side. Okay, so I'm going to read this. This is from the book of Mark, chapter 12, verses 13 through 17. All right, you ready?
I know.
Then they sent to him some of the Pharisees and the Herodians to catch him in his words. When they had come, they said to him, "Teacher, we know that you are true and care about no one, for you do not regard the person of men, but teach the way of God in truth. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Shall we pay or shall we not pay?" But he, knowing their hypocrisy, said to them, "Why do you test me? Bring me a denarius that I may see it." So they brought it. And he said to them, "Whose image and inscription is this?" They said to him, "Caesar's." And Jesus answered and said to them, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And they marveled at him. That's the New King James Version. I wanted to start off the conversation with that because we just watched the inauguration of Joe Biden.
Yeah, we did.
You have in this verse, you have Jesus, who, if you're coming from the perspective of Christians, is like Son of God, Savior of the universe. You're coming from some other perspectives, very wise teacher, enlightened human being. Lots of people, depending on what whatever the individual listener's belief system is, this thing will carry different weight. One of the things that I found really, really interesting about it is that he said, "Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's." And he was defining two different things. So he was implying that there are things that don't belong to God.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that don't belong to Caesar. He was implying, because he says, these are Caesar's things, and over here are God's things, separate. In a lot of our worldviews, we very much see God. Everything is God's. Everything belongs to God.
Yeah,
and it's because this is my theory, and you can expand on it or contradict it. That we believe that God is a material being who owns all the material possessions too, and created all the material possessions in a very real way. The way.
As it is written, he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills.
Yes, right. He owns that everything is his. The Bible itself says that over and over again, especially in the Old Testament, implies that everything belongs to God and all of things God. And even Jesus himself kind of implied some of those things as well.
Well, and he flat out said it. He said everything comes from God.
Everything comes from God, right?
Yeah.
Then over here, he's saying, "Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and to God the things that are God's." He's defining two different spaces. So how do you, wise one, how do you read this?
How do I read this?
How do you read this?
I read this. Well, you have to read. First of all, if you want to understand what Jesus was saying, we have to read it as a Jew would understand.
Let's do it. Let's read it as a Jew.
Right. Yeah. So, and to borrow from some of Rob Bell's scholarship, remember, I don't know if any of you guys have read What is the Bible? Where is the Bible?
Can we read it as a Brooklyn Jew?
A Brooklyn. I don't have a good Brooklyn accent. I like Boston Jesus better than
Boston.
I'm like, me and my friend Dan me and my buddy Dan, which Dan Redwine's one of the funniest people I know. And him and I always talked about making this series of videos where you just do the teachings of Jesus, but they're interpreted culturally. Yeah. And so we were thinking about Boston Jesus, where you're in like a bar, we're all in a bar, and his disciples are all like guys from Southie, you know what I mean? And he's just like, you see the girl, you look at her, you got lust in your heart, you're fucked. You know, you know, you're fucked. You know, right? That's Boston Jesus. You know,
Right.
kind of fun.
Yeah, but everything has an F word in it. You know.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, just bring me a fucking quarter. Whose image is on this fucking thing?
Exactly. Get the fuck.
Okay.
It's fucking Caesar.
I know, Caesar's. You don't say.
Yes, this is what I'm talking
Give the
about. We
fucking
need
quarter to George Washington. It belongs to him. Give to God the things that are God's. Fuck. Get the fuck out of here.
Yes, that's it. That is it, man.
That's it.
All right, we got to do that. All right, that's it's coming. The next chapter in my pilgrimage.
You end it right exactly how they end it right there, and they marvel at him.
They marvel. Look at no, like
you
this.
Believe this fucking guy?
No, it's a slow pan to a guy in the corner. You're like, look at this fucking guy. That'd be awesome.
And it's not swearing because we're using a Boston.
Yes, it's not swearing. It's not swearing. It's like when they said ass in the Bible, you know, and you'd be like, oh, we get to say it. Sweet.
I know. When I was a kid, that was a real thing. You know, I remember Pastor Church actually using the word ass a few times in scripture because he's reading King James Version and it was the whole thing. And us just going,
it was like they asked to talk the talking ass.
Yes.
I love it.
Yes.
Ace Ventura action there.
I think it's a great idea. It doesn't really help us interpret this verse very well. But
no, it doesn't. Well, so reading it like a Jew, as we were saying, to retrace our steps.
Not a Boston Jew, not a Brooklyn Jew, but a Jew, say 2,000 years ago, Palestine.
Yeah. Well, the idea was Jesus was always culturally what he was there. He was really performing the function of a prophet. You know, I mean, really, he was a prophet in his time. And the prophet was always calling people back to the truth, the essence, right? So, you know, starting with Moses, right at the beginning, everything was the prophet's role was always to call them back to the truth. I mean, you read the minor prophets, and it's like this religion's become this crazy thing, and the poor, it was the poor being oppressed. It was always everything became a power dynamic. Everything was the ego hijacking everything in order to oppress and to gain power and maintain power. And so Jesus was always calling people back to the true essence of the true nature of God, love, and peace and joy, and these kinds of things. So when he said, you know, give to God what is God's, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, what he was talking about was the nature of these things, the nature of God, the nature of Caesar, money and all that power dynamic and all that. I mean, the way money was functioning, I think Jesus literally had a high level of disgust for the way money was functioning in the Jewish religion.
Yeah, you could tell. I mean, his whole outrage, his eruption at the temple, you know, turning over the tables.
Yeah.
And, you know.
So we have to understand that when they asked him this question, they were asking inside of the context of having listened to Jesus, I'm sure many times, rail against the way wealth was being used to abuse the poor and the massive inequality and the massive injustice that was happening in their country. And so when that happened, he was calling those people back. When he said that, I think he's calling people back to the true essence of God. Right, giving to God what is God's, giving to Caesar. Money is a creation of the ego. It's a creation of man. It's a structure, and he's saying it has no place in the true spiritual way of being, in a spiritual way of thinking. Right, and so I wouldn't see it as separate as much as Jesus saying we are called to a higher perspective on this.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
We are called to, and it's funny is I think it's super relevant to us. Super.
Yeah, I mean
relevant.
that kind of leads nicely into the discussion about politics.
Yeah, well, and even about, I mean, you can't separate, and at least in this country, you can't separate politics from business, right? You can't separate money.
No, you cannot.
Corporations are. We live more in what I would call a corporate oligarchy than we do in an actual republic, right? But you know, as someone who I own a business, you own a business, right? My business, it's always been this really interesting thing because everyone's always telling you, everybody has the egoic system for how business works and the egoic structure for how money works. And from the beginning, I've always been like, no, I'm going to do this spiritually. I'm going to give to God what is God's. I'm going to give to Caesar what is Caesar's. And I'm going to try to do this business in a completely spiritual way, which is a very, very, very ocean-like abstract. It has a, so like if anybody, and the inner workings of my business, and you've watched it all happen, right? Where almost nothing I've done has been conventional.
Yeah.
It's just flowing like a river, and I'm just kind of watching the way it flows and just trying to flow with it, kind of thing. And I think that Jesus was calling everyone back to that space. And I think that it's a tricky thing, when we talk about politics, because there's this separation between church and state, which is such a fascinating concept. But we have to recognize that the separation between church and state was not meant to be a separation of those things spiritual and those things material. It was meant to be a separation of power dynamics. Those were all egoic structures, the state and the church.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. None of us can argue the fact that at one point the church and the political structures were one. Right.
Yeah.
Completely. I mean, we know that for a fact. In the United States itself, as a formal government post-Revolutionary War, that was never the case. But we can say that a belief system was definitely one with the power structure. Right. And it was a Judeo-Christian Protestant.
And it still is.
System. It's been ingrained in the Constitution, in the Declaration of Independence, in all of our documents. It's completely ingrained.
Yeah, it's totally ingrained. I mean, the entire process this morning was Judeo-Christian, even though there's kind of a wink and a poke with an elbow towards other ways of thinking spiritually, but we are yet to see spirit, actual spirit, the way spiritual to function on spiritual. We're yet to see that invade our politics. And actually,
so just so we're clear on from a listener standpoint, I'm going to put this podcast out probably tomorrow. Yeah. Today is the 20th.
Yeah.
This was inauguration morning. We had here in Hawaii, it was 6:30 a.m. when Joe Biden was inaugurated and gave his oath of office and became president, 46th president. So you were saying, so in terms of a spirituality, in terms of a practice of spirituality, it's interesting because you can look back on individual presidents and you can assess what their level of spiritual practice was, or you can say, that I think all of them have professed to be a Christian. I think every single president we've ever had of some sort, Christian or Catholic. We've had 2 officially Catholic presidents now. Yeah. But I think every single one of them have said they were Christians, including Donald Trump, who said, I think he tried to quote 2 Corinthians and said that the Bible is his favorite book. And right.
And I remember that he held up the Bible.
Yeah, held up the Bible.
Tear gas all those people so he can clear the path to go.
And the Bible was upside down when he held it. Did you see that?
Yeah, which is like a satanic thing, dude. Remember we were taught that was what Satanists would do?
I know, but none of the Satanists were like, I guess that's okay now. No, it was. Yeah, I mean, so here's I know that people that are listening, some of the listeners are, voted for Trump, some voted for Biden. I guess my question is, how do we, in today's day and age, which blue and red, Democrats and Republicans, there's definitely still a very much a dualistic kind of understanding of how things are, and we so easily say that God is on the side of this thing or God is on the side of that thing. I remember when we were playing basketball in high school, we played for Seattle Christian High School, we would pray before the games and coach would always be like, show Christ, you need to show Christ or whatever in this.
Show Christ. That was a big thing.
Yeah. This, get out there and just play your ass off and just really work hard, which is great. How do we get out of, how do we integrate this dualistic space in which we're rooting for our guy, and so many people, there are so many Christians right now that are Christians that believe that the president election was stolen and and bought into all of the hate rhetoric. I mean, some of my oldest friends that were Christians just like went way over this kind of side of like, QAnon and all of some of the really more far out conspiracy theories. And it became, there was so much fear, so much hate. And from a spiritual perspective, I'm always looking at it, I'm going, look, fear doesn't have any, there's no place for it in a spiritual life. It doesn't really flow. I mean, I don't know. Do you agree with that?
Well, I don't know if I'd phrase it that way because of course, fear is a part of the process of a spiritual life, right?
Explain.
I think, well, I think Christianity, like the way I live Christianity for me is a process of working out my salvation with fear and trembling on a daily basis, taking on my cross daily. There's an idea of encountering, like I still encounter fear at times inside me, right? So it is a part of my process.
Yeah.
But true spirituality, what it does is when we live a life that is an actual spiritual life, our goal is to uproot fear, transmute it in a sense, and then.
But would you say that same when it comes to like, I'm afraid the Democrats are going to, turn us into socialists?
Well, absolutely. Like, I mean, and if anybody ever did that, like my mother-in-law is a great example. Okay, so she's one of these people who's just terrified and angry, and that radical left is going to kill us all, kind of communist thing, and if she was open to actually exploring what it would look like to live and breathe a spiritual way of being and allow that to enter into her perspective when it comes to politics and stuff, I would do what I would do with every single client in the world, which is we have to get down to the level where truth is constructed. Okay.
Yeah.
So, if I said, if I said, well, Mom, what are you really afraid of? Well, I'm afraid we're going to be living in a communist country. If she said that, I'd go, okay, well, what does that fear feel like? Right. I would do that. And if there's any of our clients, my former clients listening right now, they're all going, yep, that's what he does. He does that to us every time. Like what does it feel like? And she would go, why it feels like this or that. And she would stay in this kind of first layer thought place for a long time. And if I could get her down to emotions, I just feel afraid and I'm scared. If you get down to the second layer, which is the emotional feeling, it starts to get a little deeper. And then if I said, okay, what does the fear really feel like in your body? If we could get down to the third layer, with just the energy, she might go, it's in my chest. There's something in my chest. Right.
So you're saying, so like kind of summarizing that, we're talking about the highest layer is the top layer is a thought form.
Pure ego thought form. Yeah.
It's a thought form.
Which is what most belief is. I mean, most.
I am afraid that this is going to happen. I'm afraid the Democrats will do this. I'm afraid Trump will do that. These are thought forms. Okay. Right. And what you're saying is that's an illusion.
Completely. Well, and it has its place because it's a protective mechanism that the ego constructs to organize our life experiences and help us survive. But it's a pure survival structure. It's and most politics, sit on that level. And the problem is the way we try to talk about it, the way we report it, the way, the pundits on the news, everybody talks about it from this intellectual standpoint.
Yes.
This knowledge standpoint. Like even when we talk about fact, I mean, people just aren't asking the right questions. Like I'll listen to, whatever channel you want to pick, you listen to them talk and even when they say, well, it's great. Politics at its best when we can have a civil discourse, we can agree and we can disagree in a civil way. The problem is that everyone is constructing their own reality and their own belief systems based on what their ego needs to do to help you survive what you carry.
Sure.
Ultimately, trauma for every human being, including our political leaders, trauma is dictating their reality.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they so easily judge each other, right? I mean, right now, you got in the Senate and in the Congress, you got QAnon supporters and believers I'm sure maybe their worlds are shattered because Q said that President Trump would be, and there was some secret thing that was going to happen on the 20th and it didn't, and, it's not an intellectual, it doesn't live on the plane of intellect. It doesn't live on the plane of knowledge. Okay. It lives on the plane of energy, which is on that third layer down there. That's where reality is being constructed from. And so it when I say spirit hasn't yet kind of penetrated into our political thinking, we're still asking the wrong questions, which means, of course, we come up with the wrong answers and we're debating it. It reminds me a lot of how, if you study the history of war, how what was that movie? There was a movie about the Cuban Missile Crisis, 13 Days.
Yeah.
And I remember at one point there was a scene where Kennedy's, and Kennedy's character, he's, the guy's playing Kennedy is talking about, he's like, have you ever read the book, The Guns of August? He's like, I wish every man on that quarantine line could read that book. He goes, because he was talking about World War I.
Right.
He was saying World War I was here. He goes, and he said, all the theory of that war was based on the last war. Right. But the technology had changed. Everything had changed. I mean, chemical warfare, machine guns, airplanes, all this stuff was in there, but their theory was based on the last war. Right. So he said, so millions of people are dying because of it. And no one could even understand why. That's how we're still doing it. Yeah. We're we're still doing political. This is what happened. Okay, so when the Democratic debates began and all the different candidates that were trying to get the nomination, Marianne Williamson standing on the stage. Okay, you have this enlightened spiritual teacher, and she's on the stage, and she is saying stuff that is right here, right now. This is what's needed, projecting the future like high level consciousness.
She's talking about love.
She's talking about love as a politic, and she's articulating it in a super profound way. And she's written a book about it that has it's incredible. Her whole thing was, and it's simple. Think about this. I saw her post on her Instagram the other day. Her whole thing was like, okay, so this is how much money we spend cultivating war and defense and this. And she said the first thing she would do as president is create a Department of Peace.
Right.
And everybody's like, oh, you stupid hippie lady, whatever, blah, totally. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? This is a woman who she simply said, hey, let's just take $1 billion of this small little fracture of what you're spending on killing everyone and creating weapons. Let's take $1 billion and let's take some of the most brilliant minds on the planet and let's go intentionally cultivate peace in the world. Now, that's when you start to see spirit is entering into our politics.
Sure.
And
it does say something about the fact that, like, I mean, she got laughed off the stage
completely, and that says everything about where that collective consciousness is at.
Sure,
they laughed her on stage, and they think she's a nut job that whatever, and because she's actually now she's doing the same thing MLK did, the same thing Gandhi did, the same thing Jesus did, because it's acceptable when it's a revolution against a common enemy, against a power structure. So if she was coming in and she was fighting for the rights of this or that oppressed person, everybody would be like, whoa, it's so inspirational. Right. But when it comes to actually saying, no, we're talking about real actual leadership now within this structure.
Right. Caesars.
The collective is not going to go quietly into the night.
So that's an interesting thing, right? So, okay. So we'll get back to that in a second in terms of, is that a viable way to do politics? Do you see if you have a vision of which that can actually work from a structural standpoint? I've been very involved in politics in my life. I've worked on many campaigns in Alaska. I was even running for office at one point. Marianne Williamson, as soon as she was up there talking and stuff like that, and we were talking, I knew immediately, I could recognize immediately, oh, she's talking about spirit. She's talking through that space, and she's trying to talk to anybody who can hear her, but that whole, if you have the ears to hear, you can hear. And people are not in that space. They're looking for, what are we going to do with economics? I need to know numbers. What's your tax policy? What's your immigration policy? What's your policy on foreign wars and all this stuff? They want to know all that kind of thing, right?
Well, and she has to be able to sum it up in 30 seconds.
Yes.
Which when you're living and working in spirit, you've made room for all the complexity in your life in this thing and in this space, and you can say something, but it's not, unless you have the ears to hear, it's gonna be very hard to understand in 30 seconds.
Right.
And she didn't even get that much time. Yeah. Because the establishment didn't take her seriously from the beginning.
See, and that's kind of an interesting, if you're thinking about politics from a standpoint, is that I guess if I was gonna try and summarize this, let's say after to the listeners, I'd say, okay, so number one, it's not about looking to a particular type of leader. It's not even looking towards a Marianne Williamson. It's starting within yourself and saying, when I'm addressing how I vote on things, how I participate in civil discourse, what do I feel, and what's in my body, and what's and where, and go there first. Yeah. This comes back to me, like, where my meditation practice is a really important part of how I deal politically. I mean, I will say this. I want to tell a quick story. On January 6th, when we woke up a couple weeks ago, and there was a riot at the Capitol. As someone who, I'm a very patriotic American, I love my country very much. My wife is a veteran. I was disqualified. I tried to join the Army. I was disqualified because of my knees. I'm just a very proud American, right? And I sat in front of the TV all day and just watched that all happen. And I just felt just so nauseated and sick to my stomach as these guys are raiding the Capitol and yelling Jesus's name. And there was a video that surfaced of them praying on the floor of the Senate, standing and, while they're raiding people's desks and hunting for senators and for the vice president. And I was watching all that, and I snapped a little bit. I broke. I have lots of friends on Facebook that are believe in all kinds of things.
Yeah.
But as soon as I saw anybody on Facebook, any of my friends, any of my conservative friends that were talking about, it's Antifa is posing as conservatives and trying to find ways to support Donald Trump through it and trying to find ways to blame it on the left and everything, I kind of lost it. And I look back now and I unfriended a bunch of people. I just went, oh, pow, 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 pow.
Okay. I was about to say, is there any good rants that you can direct me to? I love reading your rants.
No, they've all been deleted, man. I just, because I hadn't done that in a long time because I was kind of like, yeah, live and let live, let these people kind of do their thing. But I couldn't, I don't know, the conflict that was going on inside of me. I mean, I can tell you exactly how I felt. I felt just furious. I was just furious, man.
Now that's okay. So that's second layer.
Right. So what's third layer?
What's third layer?
What is it? Help me.
Well, you were feeling that you were tapping into the collective.
Right.
Right. There was a collective trauma. The reason that was such an intense thing is you're talking about a collective trauma. Okay? And I'm not talking about trauma that happened to everyone. I'm talking about everyone holding a trauma that's vibrating at the same frequency and is connecting into each other in order to fortify and strengthen their ability to survive and protect. This is what creates tribalism. This is what creates sports fans. This is what creates everything.
Riots at the Capitol.
Yeah. And when you turn your attention towards it, that energy, you'll feel that energy.
Mm-hmm.
And that energy has a capacity to suck people in, no matter what your mental, it'll screw with you. No matter what your mental capacity is. That's why I say it's not a matter of intelligence. It'll suck you straight into it. I have people that are highly intelligent that I know and love and deeply respect who are starting to, that QAnon thing, man, there might be something there. And you're going, what? And it's because the power of this collective field is so strong. It is such an intense collective. And then you see the left will create its own kind of, its own collective field.
The Antifa, and the whole,
right. There's this thing where you're just talking about trauma and how it functions. But the thing is, the nature of trauma is to barricade itself within a collective.
Right.
That's why the holidays are so hard for everybody, because everybody returns to their family collective and they're like, ugh, I gotta get out of this house, because you're feeling that energy. And we still feel obligated to go and hang out with these toxic people because they're part of my family. And a lot of people, I mean, we see it with our sisters, right? There's this kind of disgust of, like, especially with our younger sisters, this kind of disgust of it, but still got to go do it and still use words like, oh, I love mom or whatever. But the truth is, like, there's this, you can tell it's a really hard thing to actually buy into, but it's that collective field that grabs you and holds you, because we're all resonating at the same frequency. If you could go to the Capitol 2 weeks ago and I put special glasses on you, and you and I are, we're in a hot air balloon, 1,000 feet above, and I put glasses on you that allow you to see the quantum fields and magnetic fields that are all over the place, and you'd go, holy shit, and you would just see a field in there. And that's one of the reasons why people are like, I mean, even you hear people talking about it like, that escalated quickly. That really got out of hand. And it's because the energy, as it bonds with itself, it defends itself. It literally was creating a movement. That's why the people that were like, this was 1776 and stuff, I totally believe that they fully, with everything in them, believed that what they were doing was true and good and holy in some way. I mean, you see these people going in there, it's like they have no sense of anything. They had no idea that they were completely, totally undermining our democracy. That George Washington would be like, what the hell are you doing? They didn't know. They didn't know.
Not only that, like, they didn't even have the common sense not to videotape it.
Right. I know, right? They all got their phones out going, and it really is, dude. It really is a collective energy that if you turn, that's why, Jesus, you can tell he was just like disgusted with it. He turns, I think he turned himself away from that energy so often. You know what I mean? And
so when we are going, so I want to back up just a second. It's really, we have to be involved. I feel very, very adamant. I see that when people begin to deconstruct and when they begin to work through trauma or begin to heal, there's always a period of time in which they want to disengage from, they recognize the the collective feels. They recognize the hate and the anger. They start to see it, and it doesn't. And because they've been healing, there's this different thing going on inside them, and they don't want to just be in that pool. And a lot of them will disengage civically as well. They'll go, no, you know what? I'm not going to vote. I'm not going to. That's all a waste of time. It's all meaningless. And they go into that Ephesians, or not Ephesians, but Ecclesiastes moment, where it's meaningless. It's all meaningless, and they want to just disengage. I went through a little period of that as myself. I came out of that with more of I feel more proud to be an American now. And I recognize that it's a tribe. I recognize that it's a nation, and that a flag is a symbol, and that all of these things are Caesar's.
Sure.
You know, I get it. Like I recognize that I live in that space, but I feel more passionate about having my when I'm not just drowning in the collective, having my center, being a centered and I guess you could say spiritually aware person in that space. I think it's important.
Right.
And I always tell people, like, I like my kids, you know, they know that in our house, voting and being informed about what's going on in terms of our country and stuff like that. And I mean, I'm to the point where I talk to my 11-year-old about tax policy, you know, and I always think that stuff is really important. I think people should engage. It's hard for me right now, and I'll admit this, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. It's hard for me it's harder than it's ever been to say, to uphold a person's belief system, and go and say, yeah, no, it's being conservative or liberals, they're equals or whatever, two sides of the same coin or whatever. Right. I'm having a hard time with that one.
Yeah. Well, it's a fallacy. It's not true.
Right. Richard Rohr talked about, he didn't look at it from a horizontal spectrum. I really appreciate Richard Rohr's teachings on this stuff, because he talks about it, and this isn't a hierarchy. It's not a better than, but he talks about it in terms of opening of awareness. He talks about the conservative, he talks about the liberal, and then he talks about what he called the Reconstructionists. He said that on the conservative level, we are constructionists. Mm-hmm. We are preserving and holding what we believe to be the foundation, right? So that's why you hear conservatives talk a ton about the founding fathers, about 1776, about hearkening back to the good old days. This was Donald Trump's whole message when he was running for president, you know, back in the good old days, back in the good old days, back in the good old days.
Make it great again. Yeah.
Make it great again, go back, preserve the foundation. So Rohr distinguished that as the construct, preserving the construct. Yeah. And then he talked about deconstruct. He says the liberal is a deconstructionist. He said, which is a necessary step for all of us if we're going through trauma and pain and we're working through healing. He said the deconstruction is where the constructs, you see the illusion and realize that that's a thought form. These are things that we have created and built up, but they're not actually standing on solid ground. They are, and we begin to deconstruct, and all of these things begin to fall apart. That can feel kind of scary at points, and you'll see where some liberals become very, very cynical. Yeah. I interviewed.
I saw a comedian doing a thing where he was interviewing Trump supporters, and he was like, "When was America great?" Because it's like, you say make America great, and they'd all like, this 1942. It's like, oh, so when black people couldn't vote.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And he's like, at this point,
women.
He's like 17. When one guy was like, when the founders put pen to paper in 1776, he goes, let's have the whole slavery thing, right? He's like, well, yeah, there was that, but like everything he did, he's like just kind of pointing out the illusions,
right?
But of course, he's sitting it from this space of going, I'm better than you,
right? And that's the thing, right? The liberal kind of, that's the drawback, is that the liberal, I'm more enlightened than you are, I'm smarter than you are. I've realized I've realized the illusion.
Yeah.
And, but the kind of the shadow side of liberalism is that cynical kind of anger, because I realize, and yet I still have to live next to you, and I still have to go into the same voting booth as you, and I still have to somehow, you see that division happening between blue states, red states, right? And everybody goes, oh, we're so divided. Texas is so conservative with it. And I go, no, actually, if you looked at the elections in Texas, pretty split. It wasn't like a massive landslide. It's actually the country's extremely well balanced right now between conservative and liberal, even in quote unquote conservative states. You can see where Trump, there were places where he blew Biden out of the water and vice versa, where Biden blew
Right.
Trump out of the water. But for the most part, we're actually pretty kind of
cities are more liberal, and
exactly,
the countryside is more
right.
conservative. Yeah.
Right. And that makes a ton of sense in terms of where kind of progressive thought is happening is in the cities and the universities and whatever, where people are kind of trying to tear down constructs. That's like what they're invested in. So then Rohr talks about this third level that he calls the reconstruction, right? It's where you no longer want you've gone through the liberal thing, but you've seen that doesn't work either. It doesn't solve that problem. It doesn't fix that thing. It doesn't fill that hole in your heart. It doesn't bring you peace.
Yeah.
And reconstruction is coming to that space where you kind of rise above and you begin to see it all. And Rob Bell and his Spiralodynamics talk that he gave on his podcast, which I highly recommend to anybody if you want to listen to an interesting podcast.
Well, I was about to say, your Richard Rohr was articulating his understanding of spiralodynamics. That's what it was all about.
Yeah, and Rob and his son did on the Robcast. They did a really wonderful series called Me, We, Everybody that was really good, and everybody should listen. I think they did 4 parts on it, explaining their kind of his take on spiralodynamics. And he was talking about the yellow space where you rise to this color yellow, where you see all of it, you allow all of it. You see where you don't have to dip your toes in it. Like, I don't have to be friends on Facebook with my far right QAnon friend. I don't have to. I can go, you know what? This doesn't serve me or him in any way, shape, or form. And I've got so much time in the day. I'm just not going to commit any more energy to try and help that person or to, or that person needs my help. I'm going to say go in peace and we're going to go our separate ways or whatever. That's okay. It's okay to spend your energies where you think that they're beneficial, not only to the other person or to you, but to you too, right? That reconstruction allowing us just to slowly build a construct, knowing that it's a construct that works for us towards peace. And this is where I've been for a little, this is where I've been for a bit. Understanding that, that's a part of my construct. That's a part of my construct. That's a part of my construct. And that's helpful for me,
Yeah. So Ken Wilber created a podcast. He wrote a book called A Theory of Everything. And this is where I first learned about spiralodynamics. And I was already seeing the world through that level because I'd learned kind of in some of my reading about levels of consciousness. Right. And the problem is people tend to see that as superior, inferior, which of course it is at some level. It's not, but it's not better than, in the sense that I'm not better than someone that lives at a lower level of consciousness. I can see more, I can hear more, I can understand more, I have access to more. My life is probably going to be profoundly better. But at the same time, there are people that live at super low levels of consciousness that where there is a truth known as, that you could say ignorance is bliss. Right. We see it articulated by Cypher in the Matrix when he's like, put me back into the Matrix and make me a movie star. And I know that I want
to be somebody important.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like a movie star. But spiralodynamics is what spiralodynamics is people were, the creator of it. God, what was his name? I can't remember his name, but he was, what he was trying to do was take the concepts of the expansion of consciousness and apply it to things like business and politics. And he's like, we need to create it into a more kind of systematic way of understanding of it, because the world won't accept if we talk about it in spiritual terms. Right. But there is a truth, a reality that is dictating all of our realities, which is consciousness. Perception is reality. Consciousness dictates that. Yep. Carl Jung said, if we don't do what the work of making what is unconscious conscious, then it will dictate your life and you'll call it fate. So people will see themselves as a victim when they are clearly not a victim. Right. And this is what creates all of reality. This is all the problems and all the good stuff. This is what racism is. Racism is not an intellectual concept. It is a concept of consciousness. Right. It is, the issue, what got Trump elected is consciousness. What got him unelected is an issue of consciousness, right? There is a rising consciousness. What's being articulated in the Black Lives Matter movement it's not an intellectual concept. And of course, people try to suck it into that and debate what is true or not true about history, when the truth is it's an issue of consciousness, right? You can't wake someone up by just quoting facts at them about systemic racism, because they'll just go, that's not a thing.
Yeah.
Right.
I don't believe
You know,
that.
and that's,
Yeah.
yeah. So when
Yeah.
I mean, one of the greatest truths that Donald Trump articulated during his presidency is when he said, I could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and not lose one supporter.
Yeah.
That's a really, really fascinating thing. Like, like, I mean, and there might, if there's any Trump supporters listening right now, okay, so like they might still believe that the election was stolen, where 63 court cases with no evidence presented whatsoever might not be enough for them to, because of the level of consciousness they're at, their consciousness, their ego is going to function to defend and protect, protect them from, not from liberals or communists,
Right.
it's protecting them from their own trauma.
Right.
The entire all belief systems at that level of consciousness are constructed to protect you from your own trauma, from what's coming up inside your own body. That's why deconstruction, I know a lot of people listening to this have gone through or are going through a deconstruction in their religious beliefs and things like that. That's why it can be quite physical. It's a pretty physical experience because trauma is coming up. I mean, I've spent a lot of time over the last 10 years in the fetal position,
Yeah.
as your body's just
Yeah.
wrestling with the loss of all the certainty and all those kind of things.
Sure.
A very physical experience because we are being protected in
Sure.
that way. I mean, I hung out with, you and me are big soccer fans, right? The Seattle Sounders that's our team. And I hung out with the ECS one day, Emerald City Supporters. There's this supporters group.
Yeah.
And I went to their bar before the game and was in that environment, and then went and sat in the middle of the ECS and all the chants and the screams and the cheering and I realized pretty quickly, most of these people know nothing about soccer.
Right.
A lot of them aren't even really soccer fans.
Right.
But they love being a part of this collective.
Yeah.
You can see it. It's a tribe. It's a place to survive. It's a place to belong.
And I mean, the ECS has a mission. They have songs. They have leaders. They have their credo.
They have a cult leader, which is the club itself.
Right.
And we need the cult leader to project an image of power, even though it's all make believe. Right. Sports is a make believe concept. It's entertainment. Right. And then the second you win the trophy is the symbol of the thing. I mean, when the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, it's like 750,000 people flooded the city and they're cheering for us.
Dude,
like
I remember my brother-in-law, who's the biggest Seahawks fan that I know, fanatical to the point of unhealthy. Right. And when the Seahawks won the Super Bowl the first time, he was like, I'm done. I'm not going to watch any more football. I'm done. And I remember going, yeah, right. But totally, he was speaking his truth, right? In that moment, he was saying, no, I'm done. I'm going to stop here, because there was already, I mean, it's literally that same day, he already had this fear that was creeping up of, oh, this is going to be over. I've got to find a way to prolong this feeling of being in power, being on the peak of
being ultimately being good,
right?
Being loved. It's being loved.
Exactly.
And that's what we're trying to do, is we're trying to be loved by ultimately we're all trying to be loved by mom and dad. And our God is designed to give us that love, our accomplishments, our jobs, all the things especially from that level of consciousness. And what really changes over the time is your consciousness expands. You begin to see more and more the nature of all things, including God and including yourself. And eventually you start to realize that you are loved. Right? You can go from even being loved. That's a big thing you see in the church. Everybody's trying to be loved. And they're just, God loves you. God loves you. You're okay because God loves you. And eventually you realize that's not enough. Right. And then you expand, and you don't want to be loved anymore because you're not a child. You want to be love itself. You want to feel it coursing through your veins. And people are still waiting. And that's one of the things that changes. You stop needing a daddy God, but that expansion of consciousness dictates all of reality, And that's why people that are, they're enlightened people will look at it and go, yeah, no, you don't have to argue with them. You don't have to be on Facebook. You don't have to tell them that they're wrong. You don't have to. Even I had a friend the other day who was saying, if you're not standing up vocally against racism, then you're complicit in it. And and you're kind of warping something MLK said about, but he was talking about political leaders, and I'm going, that's not true, man. That's not true. I am not obligated to take my racist mother, who's a good person, but she's totally unconscious. I'm not obligated to try to convince her of her racism. That's something, if I do that, like what he's doing, what he's articulating is something that I unconsciously have to resolve her, or else I'm not okay. Right. When the truth is, if I'm okay, I can let her suffer and let spirit deal with her. We can ultimately let spirit deal with everybody. And we can take one step at a time towards that love that we want to create in us and around us. Sure. And that's what Marianne Williamson was trying to do. She was saying, hey, ultimately, this type of enlightenment within our own selves can lead to a political movement.
Sure. Okay. So let's get back to that for a second. Okay. Because in me, as a person who's been involved in politics and has also done a ton of time, I spent a lot of time healing and working on spirit and meditating. And I see how my spiritual practice helps me in my political ideals and my beliefs. I see how it plays out. I see how I look carefully at policy about how treatment of the poor. I look carefully at treatment of, I guess, those who have a foot on their neck, as they say. And because my heart is one of that looks for justice and equality. And I think that these are all things that come from my spiritual practice, right? And how it applies in that. But in terms of how you can create a political movement, I just think I was in Biden's speech this morning. He gave just a pretty, normal, boring presidential inauguration speech. Nice and boring, right? Unity, and everything he said has been just about, unity and caring about each other and picking each other up and helping each other. And it's been all the things that we used to expect of a president.
Yeah.
And I look at it and I go, that's maybe what an enlightened, maybe humility in politics is a form of enlightenment creeping into politics right now, that it's maybe the form that we can accept, that we can kind of look at, because we can't talk about love other than loving your brother, loving your neighbor. And so, but we can't talk about love as an energy form. Like, it's just, like I said, Marianne Williamson got laughed off the stage. It wasn't even close. Now when she was talking, she was maybe didn't articulate it as well as, or in a way that maybe larger people could. As a messaging expert myself, I looked at it and I went, there's probably a better way to say that so that people could understand what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But do you see a future in which a message like hers, whether put the same way or in a maybe slightly more helpful way, can work in politics?
Absolutely, 100%. But I think that it's a matter of evolution, and there's always, it's that old adage, like the first one through the door is always going to get hit the most,
Absolutely.
And there are tip of the sword leaders.
Right.
You and I are a little bit like that, to be honest with you. Like, my pilgrimage is
I think someone called us a cult leader.
I've been called that many times. And
I think it was Luke. I think Luke had said, you guys could be considered cult leaders. And I was like, well, I really don't want to, because I'm not making any money off this.
Right. I know.
I was like, I'm a cult leader. I mean, like, and right now, you're on the other side of that TV.
Yeah, that's on the other side.
Give.
Like, there's someone with lupus.
Go to mypilgrimage.com right now. I see you sitting on your couch in South Dakota. I can see you. Your leg is hurting. Your left leg is hurting. Right now. Go to mypilgrimage.com, hit that Patreon button, and you just pledge your life savings, and that left leg will stop hurting right now. You just do it.
Yep.
Anyway,
I love it, dude. And that's the thing is, but a cult leader is just simply is a being that takes a symbol that holds the power of something. It's a little bit like it's a talisman, right? A talisman is an object imbued with power, right? It's a talisman. I was thinking about a talisman.
I was thinking about Daniel Moy and his scepter. The president, when we were kids in Kenya, right? The president, he was like president for life, dictator for life, or whatever. They had a phony election every 4 years or whatever. And he had that giant scepter that he carried everywhere he went, with the giant jewels on it.
Which, of course, it was fascinating because they got that from their colonial history being dominated by the British, right? But that was the symbol of power, right? Whoever holds this scepter, right? But I'm telling you, man, like, I think that I see evolution happening. And I am doing what I do for a living, where I'm helping people. I'm working. I got clients all over the place. I see these 18, 19, 20-year-old kids with highly evolved thinking, where the idea of any system that hurts oppressed people, it cannot stand. Like, there's a generation of people where everyone, I mean, eventually the stuff Marianne Williamson was articulating will be taught in elementary school. Now, the question is when, right? The question is when. Eventually, understanding how systems, how consciousness functions, spiral dynamics, maybe that will be one of the tools. How consciousness functions in human existence will be standard education. Now, we might be hundreds of years away from that. Who knows? But I do know this, is that all things are being redeemed. My job is to redeem my own self, and then and do that with everything I've got, so that those around me, because that gives the people around me I get to form collective fields of very higher vibrations, fields of love, where people that enter into this space, there's a profound love, and no one's ego is dominating and controlling that space. And it's a weird thing, because you'll see it when I'm always fascinated by when enlightened leaders start to take on some weird egoic thing. A friend of mine, he's a highly enlightened person.
Yeah.
We're having dinner and he starts talking QAnon. Yeah, he starts going, well, Trump did do some good things. And I go, this is just a few weeks ago. I'm like, what are you talking about? And he goes, he ended was it child sex slavery? And I go, you're not talking QAnon, are you? I just said, yeah. I said, you talking QAnon? He goes, it's real. I go, how do you know it's real? And he goes, I looked into the energy. And he made it, and of course he did look into the energy, and that collective just grabbed him and it pulled him straight in, and he let himself start being consumed by the information and all this kind of space. And that collective is really, really a powerful thing. The idea is that enlightened people you still have an ego, and as long as you have an ego, that ego is going to try to protect you, even from collective energies, from your own trauma that you're unaware of. All that kind of stuff's going to come out. And belief systems, the ego is just always trying to create a belief system to resolve all that stuff within us.
Right.
That's why people that are really enlightened tend to hold their beliefs really, really loosely.
Yeah.
They recognize that belief is just a way of organizing this experience. When Jesus said, "Be in the world, but not of it," belief is a part of being in the world.
Yeah.
But the whole idea is we remain. We're not of it though, and that's why beliefs are not meant to dictate our actions.
Sure.
Faith is meant to dictate our actions. Faith isn't a belief system, as much as it is it's a way of, belief is a part of it.
Sure.
But it's an actual, faith is more of a, I love how it's articulated in scripture when it says it's a substance of things unseen.
Right.
It's an energetic concept.
Yeah.
There's something actually felt in the body and then exercised. But there is a relationship between belief and spirit, ego and spirit, in the sense that it helps us be in the world, but not of it.
Right.
But man, I'm telling you, eventually politics will be, I'm super optimistic because I live a spiritual life.
Yeah, me too.
And I see this entire thing as the body of God just evolving and evolving and evolving. I think we're going to save the planet. I think that the suffering on our planet will dictate this evolution, because the problems, like when it comes to what we do with plastic, for instance, that problem cannot be solved through the ego. No, it has to be solved with highly evolved thinking, highly evolved thinking, and an entire planet that will come into that space. I mean, right now we got 400,000 dead from the coronavirus, and we still got millions of people who deny its existence, deny it's even a thing, don't want to take vaccines. No, we're still in a place where there's a purging of that lower level of consciousness, and suffering is going to be the thing that purges it. So we're a long ways away, but eventually, and we'll look back and go, oh, Marianne Williamson, she was onto something.
Hopefully. Okay, well, I think that's probably actually a pretty good spot to just kind of to hang our hats. I wish President Biden and Vice President Harris luck on their presidency and vice presidency. I think that it's a pretty historic thing to have our first female vice president. I think that is incredible.
I think she'll be our first. I think she will end up being our first female president as well. And
we'll see. It's going to be interesting. Again, like to our audience members who are voted for Trump, or if you and those who voted for Biden, we are asking you to go into those deeper levels. If we're hanging out in our thought forms about what is right and wrong, then we're not actually engaging that in a spiritual way. So.
Yeah. And it ain't never going to make you happy.
No, it's not going to bring you peace.
Never gonna,
I don't. It's funny.
Politics either way is going to make you happy.
The irony of politics is people want to say, "Well, politics is not supposed to bring you. It's not for bringing you happiness or peace." I go, no, actually, politics is how humans operate in these functional forms. It's the driver of human evolution in many ways. And I look at, I go, the Civil Rights Act was definitely meant to bring more peace and happiness. That's what it was supposed to do. It was just doing it for a certain level of population that had been kept underneath, and every time you have a bill that is brought up that you disagree with, you have to look at the other side of that bill and say, who does it benefit? Who does it help? Who does it take away from? And if you're in a situation where you have a spiritual life, often you'll find yourself saying, oh, it's taking a little bit from the rich and it's giving more to the poor. I go, yeah, that's the right side of history. That's the side you want to be on in terms of if you look back and you look at the way that history has taught us to, and the way that Jesus taught us, and every spiritual teacher taught us, that how we treat the poor, how we treat those who have less than us,
They'll know we are
indicates
Christians.
they'll know our crew. Yeah, it indicates everything. It indicates that our whole state of our heart. And you can get in your head, and I'm a business owner too, and I've owned my own business for 15 years now, and you can totally go, and I've seen businesses on the island. I've watched in our own industry, in the boat industry here. I've watched company. I played golf with an owner of one of those the other day, where he was like, yeah, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing this. He's paying his people peanuts. He's done everything for the survival of the business. Every way they manage this pandemic, survival of the business, and really survival of his own lifestyle and his own money and his own income. Then I watched my wife, who the first thing she did was, what's best for my employees? What's best for, and not just, my managers, but everybody, my crew, what's best for my crew, my office people. She kept everybody on healthcare the entire time. It cost us tons of money and that we didn't have, with no income for a year. And she did that because in her heart, like that's what businesses are for. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We got to take care of each other. And that was the whole kind of thing. And I look at it and I go,
our collective good.
Yeah, that's how it's, you know what I mean? It's the right way to do it. So I look at that and I go, we can take the same approach to the poor. We can take the same approach to, people that are in high crime and difficult, situation, drug addiction and all these other things. We can take the same approach in that way. And
we have to. Well, and that's the thing that we have to. And if you actually look at a lot of the conservatives that are really, really hurting or fearful over what they're going to lose, it's always fascinating, because I can go, look around you. Like,
I know
that perspective, man, you lose all the good stuff in life, the ability to have this profound gratitude for.
Right.
I was homeless 2 years ago. For 2 days, I was homeless. I lived in my car with my kids and my wife, and I had this profound gratitude in my heart. I could feel it because of the work I've done that's expanded my consciousness. I was looking around going, holy crap, like, what are we so afraid of?
Yeah.
But I get it, man. A lot of people haven't come to that place and they haven't seen their suffering yet. And we will continue to evolve as a culture, as a human race, and we will continue. And our suffering will drive that for a while until it doesn't anymore. Yeah.
I had a glass of wine with a friend of mine over Zoom, and she was talking about how just how horrible everything is and how horrible everything is as we sip this. And she was having this really nice glass of wine. Nice house. Her family has a nice house. And we sit in front of a fire and I was sitting there the whole time just going, man,
that sucks.
Got to stay in the now. Got to stay in the now as we sip our, expensive Cabernet, So
yeah.
Okay. Well, that's cool.
It is funny though. It is funny. You can't see, man. If you're a survivor, you're a survivor. I've had so many wealthy people come to me as clients and say, why do I never feel like it's going to be okay? I never feel like there's enough. I never feel like there's
right.
And it's because if you're surviving, you keep surviving no matter what's around you. You can sit there. I can't believe how many people have had that. They're just sitting there going, everything is awesome in my life and nothing means anything. And I don't understand.
Yeah. It's funny. I'll tell one kind of funny story. There's as I've mentioned before, and of course this is kind of a closed audience podcast, so I can say some of these things, but there's down close to where our boat is, there's this club, and the club is for the 0.0001%. It's for the multi-billionaires and celebrities and famous people, but it's mostly billionaires that are coming from big industry like oil and that kind of thing. And they're all just mega wealthy. They have 6-7 houses. Their houses are 15 to 30 million each, And my friend Chris is a chef down there, and he went down there and he had to cook for them on election night, November 3rd. They were having a Trump party because they were all Donald Trump fans. At our house, we were having an inauguration. We had a bunch of friends over and stuff like that. And we, of course, I voted for Biden, and no problem saying that. And we were we always do a get together on election night, and so we were having some friends over, and we were doing the kind of, and one of my friends was leading us in yoga, and we were all having a wonderful time and celebrating this thing. And Chris came over after his thing. He comes from the Trump party. He comes to pretty much a Biden party. I think there was one family here that was kind of in between. And he was just marveling at, like he said, how much they have to lose down there. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah. He says, well, for those guys, he says, when the policies, because the tax policy, because Trump's tax policy made billions and billions and billions of dollars for those people.
Yeah.
And he said, and Biden's going to take all that away and he's going to give it to poor people. And I was like, yeah, that's his plan, is to tax the wealthy and lift up the kind of try and create income equality, right? Because we're at a record level of income inequality since the Great Depression. We have the highest income inequality. And I marveled at that from a political standpoint, because I was coming at it from my spirit. I was going, if you're a billionaire and you've got 7 homes and then you'd think that you'd be like, I have enough. I have enough.
Yeah.
I have enough.
Yeah.
But interestingly enough, I've sat with some of those people and I've had conversations, and a lot of them, not every one of them, and I'm not against being rich at all. But the conversation is always about money, and it's always about their stuff. It's like, I cannot have a conversation unless I'm talking about what we're acquiring or how we're doing tax evasion or what we're trying to do to get out from underneath taxes. There's just not enough. And they live in a world where there's not enough. And I live in a world where there's enough. And so we can share. But by the way, is the whole point of my pilgrimage. This is why you and I aren't making money off this thing, is because we're here to live what we have together. This is our
I'm going to tell this story. I don't know if I have before, but I'm going to tell this story, because that was the thing. When we asked for ownership, we asked if Triple X Church to give us ownership of it.
I think you did.
The first thing they asked, I'll tell it again. The first thing they asked David was like, well, how do you plan on monetizing it? Because that was what it was all about over there. And David said, we don't. We never wanted to make money off this thing. That's not the point. We're going to give it away.
Yeah, and it goes directly back to what we were talking about: giving to Caesar what is Caesar's, and giving to God what is God's. This isn't about.
I've had some people say, what will you charge for? You do charge for your life coaching. Well, yeah, I mean, that's different than my pilgrimage. I do this for a living in my world, and it's a tremendous amount of time that I give. Right. So I do charge for that, but it's fascinating, because that's the whole thing Jesus was trying to say.
Yeah,
that's the whole thing. But I'm convinced that unless you have a perspective on the true nature of abundance, of what God is, it's awfully hard to do that, man, because you have to trust that there's something. There's a really important statement when Caesar says to, or not Caesar, but when Pilate says to Jesus, he says, "Why are you silent? Don't you know I have the power to kill you or to set you free?" He's going, "I've got the power. I'm the man. Right. I got the political." Jesus goes, "No one takes my life from me. Right. I give it freely." That's spirit,
right?
And that's where we can just give. We don't have to win anything.
Bossing Jesus, be
like, That's why I love all the people are like, Jesus for president. Like, no, I'm pretty sure Jesus would be like, no,
I'm good. Good. I love this. I don't know if anybody's seen the movie Soul from Pixar lately.
Yeah, that's good.
I love the fact that the healer, the guy that's really there to kind of help heal these souls is in his material body, is this guy spinning signs
signs,
in
San
Francisco.
Totally. Right.
I was like, that sounds about right. Right. Because the thing is what people don't really realize about Jesus as a political figure, the Gospels and the interpretations we've had, especially through evangelical Christianity and Catholicism, is that we have this kind of Son of God, a holier than thou kind of figure. A lot of the other interpretations are that he was a political figure, but that he was coming into the space because you couldn't help but be a political figure. If you come up and you say, I'm the Messiah,
sure, and
you are declaring that when the Romans are right there and you're going around and you're doing all these things, you are automatically a political figure. You're a political figure in the same way that you see, like that gal who did the poet laureate who gave the poetry reading at. She's not a political figure.
She is now a political
figure.
Well, that's why Jesus became a political figure, not because he declared himself the Messiah, but because people were listening to him.
Yes, exactly. And that was the thing, is that gal, I watched her. It was so funny. She gave that beautiful poem this morning, and I watched her. I went onto her Instagram and followed her.
As probably millions of people did.
Well, she started out the day with like 100-some-thousand followers. And I think last day I checked about an hour ago, she was at 859,000 followers or something like that. And she's going to be over 1 million. She'll be over 1 million in probably, you know what? I'm going to check right now. I bet you $1 million she's already there. Yeah. Amanda Gorman, 1.1 million followers.
She's now a political figure.
She is now a political figure. And so here's the thing that happens. And Jesus had the same choice. Amanda Gorman has this choice. Do I take that and go? Do I follow the path of Caesar? Do I follow towards power and take that road, which is not you can do, that's not right or wrong. That's a path.
Yeah.
Or do I take this other path? And it reminds me of this distinct thing that happens to Jesus at one point where he's preaching more and more radically. And he talks about drinking my blood and unless you drink my blood, you don't know, that kind of thing. He starts giving these kind of things. And that even at that point, even his followers started leaving him.
Yeah.
They
were doing the Marianne Williamson thing to him. We're not going to listen to this guy anymore.
Exactly.
This is a hard teaching. Who can follow it?
Yes, this is a hard teaching. Who can follow it? And Amanda Gorman and Eugene Goodman, they have these choices along the way in which they're going to have to go. Do I go this way? Do I go that way? If I go that way, I lose followers. But maybe my heart's bending that way. Am I more interested in retaining followers and power and prestige and money, or am I more interested in justice? Because that path is hard. Those teachings are hard. Who can follow it? Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's an interesting thing to watch kind of happen. And it'll be interesting to see, especially for that young gal, because she's only 22.
22,
to see kind of how does she use this platform that she has. I mean, she has 1 million more followers right now than she did just about 5 hours ago. Yeah, it's crazy to think about. You know what I mean? So, it'll be fascinating to see. It'll be fascinating. Yeah. Anyway, thanks, man. Thanks for taking the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Fascinating conversation, man.
Yeah, that was really interesting. Right. I hope, it's funny. Right before we were, Max Mullet texted me 5 minutes before we were going to record. And he's like, hey, when is that politics podcast coming out? And I was like, yeah, we decided to wait until the inauguration.
Yeah. Better energy. We got you, Max. We did it.
Yeah, coming at you. All right. Thanks, man. Talk to you soon.
All right, man.
Bye.
Well, there it is. Talk politics. I'm not going to do that often because, frankly, we have more important things to talk about. But hey, if you have questions or concerns, thoughts, please leave them in the comments below. Put them on YouTube, or go to the Facebook group. I got construction going on in the house. Go to the Facebook group. Leave your thoughts. We'd love to hear them. Thanks, y'all.